Thanks for sitting down with me, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, we got a guest this time. We don't have video. This is an off-site recording, and that's okay. This is good too. Sitting here with Adam Fry, and we first met playing golf together at a charity tournament, and we kind of got paired up a little bit because I had come here from a church I had been serving in Memphis, and Adam, you had been serving on the Memphis police force at one point in your life.
That's correct.
And then you had moved up here to Lincoln, and now you work for ProLift.
Mm-hmm.
You want to give a little bit of your own background or any kind of plug for ProLift or anything else you want to throw out there so people kind of know who you are and what you're about?
Rather than plugging the Memphis Police Department, of course. No, so you're right. I was with the Memphis Police Department, began in 2017, and that went till roughly right around 2022. And I had gotten connected with a gentleman named Matt Brennan when I first moved to Memphis after I graduated college. We got connected at church. Matt was just one of those guys. I don't know if you have him in your life elsewhere, but it seems like they're closer in their walk than you are.
Okay.
And it just kind of pours out of them. There's like a gravity is
Mm-hmm.
is the best way I can describe it. Matt and his wife walked through life with my wife Chelsea and I from first being introduced to each other to our courtship, our dating, our early marriage, the birth of our first child, the darkest periods of our marriage as well. They were a great spiritual mentoring couple for us, and he was the president and CEO of ProLift Rigging at that time. To kind of speak to the character of who he was as a person, he's a great example of somebody when you think about vocation as you go in life.
Right.
There's a group of people within ProLift now. We kind of lovingly refer to ourselves as the tent makers. As Paul was a tent maker in the Bible. What we're doing physically to make our money, to support our families, to encourage our growth as people and families may not be what we're on mission and purpose doing, but it's the space that we occupy. And I had gone through a pretty tumultuous time with the Memphis Police Department, and it was after the death of my partner, and he had reached out to me in late 2021 and said, Adam, what does life look like outside of policing for you? And I remember I looked at my wife, we were just in the throes of grief, and he was just well grieving with us. And I said, I think I just got a job offer in a text message. And so I reached out to him and said, yeah, we'd love to talk, this and that. And I went to his office and met him. And again, this was still when I was policing. And just walked me through what ProLift is, what they do as a construction subcontractor, and just the culture of why that company is different as a sister company with Barnhart, which is a faith-based organization in the construction realm. And he goes, why don't we go grab lunch and we'll talk about it? And when he went away, I grabbed his business card and it said, Matthew Brennan, President, CEO. And this is a guy that I'd known for the better part of a decade.
Right.
And I held that card and I looked at him and I was like, dude, what the heck? This is your outfit? You run this thing?
So you didn't know that?
I had no idea.
Because he doesn't present himself that way.
Not at all. Not at all. And it was inspiring in that moment that wow, here's a guy who he's not running a Fortune 500 company, but this is a $100 million a year company at that time. And it was like, yeah, absolutely. And he lived a good lifestyle, but he didn't wear it on his wrist like a Rolex or anything, right? He was a guy who was on vocation. He was doing his job with a mission and a purpose. And said, yeah, I want to move you to Lincoln, Nebraska, where I'm from originally.
Okay.
So it was cool that's what brought me to Lincoln, and then through Joel Stolten now with LFS, how you and I got connected on a golf course.
Yeah. Joel got us hooked up. That's right. It was an LFS charity tournament. You've said the word vocation now like a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
So Tell us the name of your church. Put in a plug for your congregation here.
Yeah, absolutely. Lincoln Berean is where we go to church.
Lincoln Berean, okay.
Mhm.
And in the Lutheran tradition, there's this apocryphal story. Like, I don't know if it's true or not, but there's this apocryphal story that early in the Reformation movement, there was this guy came up to Martin Luther and he said, Dr. Luther, Dr. Luther, I'm totally on board with this whole get back to the gospel thing. I want to be, I'm a shoemaker and I want to be a Christian shoemaker. So, like, how do I be a Christian shoemaker? I didn't know if he wanted to put, like, little crosses on the toes or, you know what I mean?
Christian Louboutin. That's the
yeah.
invention of Christian
Yeah.
Louboutin. Yeah.
Louis Vuitton, but Christian. And so he's like, how do I be a Christian shoemaker? And apparently, Luther looked at him and said, make really, really good shoes. You know? So how do you be... And that always stuck with me, that story, in part because my wife, Anna, her daddy is a shoemaker down in Brazil.
Does he make really good shoes?
He makes really good shoes. And in fact, he made her wedding shoes, handmade. And so she had these Cinderella shoes, and he made them by hand the old-fashioned way, 100%. And I just think about how he's always approached his walk with Christ, and how he's looked at this idea of vocation. So vocation is your calling from God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you said, you know, about your mentor and his sense of vocation. I know you've got a strong sense of vocation. How would you define that for people? Like, what is vocation? So, because that can be, it doesn't have to be like a churchy word, but it can get used that way. So, like, if somebody was kind of wondering what you mean by that, how would you define vocation?
You know, I'm going to do it two different ways. One, I'm going to give you kind of my definition. In this second, I'm going to kind of marry back to the mission and purpose of what our company does, because I think that the purpose of what we do in our mission really speaks to a clear definition of that word. But for me, I would go back to the Great Commission of as you go.
Okay.
When Jesus was ascending to heaven, he told his disciples, as you go, do this.
Mm-hmm.
Baptize peoples, spread the good word.
Yeah.
And it's anybody who is a believer, and you look at what should I be doing in my life? Do I give away all my earthly belongings and go dig wells somewhere in Africa, or
Right.
can I do the good work with my neighbor too? Right?
Right.
Can I do what Jesus asked me to do with my next door neighbor? And that's how I would define it myself. Our company has a great purpose statement. I think every industry in the world has a mission statement, and it's always a different iteration of we want to be the best.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right? Exactly.
Sure.
But what was really cool and attractive to me about this company revolves around what we just talked about with that definition. Is they had a purpose statement behind it, and it was, and I'll read it directly. It says, to acknowledge and glorify God by living in submission to Him through impacting people, stewarding His resources, accomplishing meaningful work, and directing our profits to His redemptive work on earth. And it's cool to see, understanding the heart of who Matt is and was for the company, and us, as you know, because you did the same thing within 15 miles, packed up in Memphis, Tennessee, and moved to Lincoln, Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
on a faith-moved, prayerfully considered, leading in direction of this is where I'm going to have you go now. Like, this is your as you go.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the understanding of our profits literally go to redemptive work. We mentioned LFS, and how Joel and I got connected was I went to a business development meeting, and he and I had a literal 30-second elevator pitch where we got on the same elevator at the Acres Championship Club and went up the flight of stairs, and he looked at me and he's like, oh, your shirt says Pro Lift Rigging, you guys just lift big stuff?
That sounds like Joel.
Anybody that knows Joel knows how he would have said that.
Yeah.
And I gave him my 30-second elevator pitch of what we do. And he's like, so who can I connect you with? Who do you want to meet up here? And I said, I want to find somebody who I can give profit to. And I remember him looking at me weird, because before I went in that elevator, when I was in the parking lot, Before sales calls, every sales guy does what's called the parking lot pep talk, where you kind of root yourself up to go in and talk to somebody.
Right, yeah.
You know? But I remember praying, like, just put me in front of somebody who's going to do the right thing. Because
Okay.
at first it was, connect me with the right person so we can go after purpose statement and our mission statement and make money. And I remember just prayerfully, just put me in front of the right guy for something. I don't know what it is. And for some reason, Joel was the right guy. I
Okay.
don't know why that is, but no,
Yeah.
he was. Joel,
I'll reassure his lovely wife, Lindsay, that he is indeed the right guy. There you go.
He's the right dude. And we met, and he was like, well, tell me what that means. And the mission statement of what we do and our purpose, at the end of every year, we give away, I don't want to quote it wrong, then we have to change our SOP. It's between
Right.
30 and 40% of our net profits go to charity at the end of the year.
Now, I think that deserves a pause for a second, right? Because between 30 to 40% of your net profits go to charity as a company. I don't know. That's not typical. I mean, I think that's that's the honest way to say that. That's not typical at all. And I think some people would probably look at that as a business model and say that it's downright insane.
Yeah. And again, our sister company, Barnhart Crane and Rigging, based out of Memphis, the Barnhart brothers, Alan, who's the CEO now, he and his brother, both last name Barnhart, so
Yeah.
think of that, right? They bought the business from their parents, which was like a pickup truck, a ladder, and some jacks and some skates way back in the day, and they bought it from their parents in 1986. And when they decided they were going to make this company, these are both strong men of faith. Again, speaking of vocation here, the first thing they did before they developed a business model was Alan and his wife and his brother and his wife sat down and read the Bible cover to cover together, and they came back and merged together and said, all right, this is going to be God's business. What did the Bible tell us? It said the love of money, and money is what God warns people about more than anything.
Right.
So they agreed when they started their business, we're going to agree to a lifestyle, not a salary. We're going to agree to taking care of ourselves and growing this business. And I believe between 1986 and mid-90s, late 90s, their company had grown year over year 20% every single year.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a point where in early 2000s, they looked at each other and said, boy, we're not protected right now. If one of us were to die, we have a whole problem with this ownership of this company.
Right.
And in the early 2000s, Alan kept 1%, his brother kept 1%, and 98% of the company went to a separate organization where they do not control the money of. So they both own 1% of a company that does nearly $1 billion a year. They both own 1% of it. 98% of the company went to an organization that they have no ownership of the money of, and it's God's company.
Wow.
And that's the spirit of why they say, we're going to do what God's called us to do, and they've maintained the same level of lifestyle that they would have, fed. These guys aren't, in a poorhouse, but they are practicing what they preach. They are people of vocation.
It's still good to be your own boss.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're not hurting if they have a company that takes care of their family. They can make a living doing this. They are their own boss in that sense. But what's funny to me is that they're not really their own boss. They made that very clear.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right.
And I'm just not sure that's the way that, I think we can say this. Most people don't approach life that way. So Matt here at ProLift mentored you. That's a company owned by Barnhart. That's kind of the backstory where they kind of how they started out going at this whole business thing. That's vocation, as in your line of work, like the shoemaker, right?
Uh-huh.
Of course, you've had 2 careers up to this point: a police officer, and now in the construction industry,
Project
right?
development.
Yeah, project development.
My phone number is. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Make sure you get your LinkedIn in there.
Yeah, there you go.
What I think is interesting, though, is in your own walk with Christ, how the sense of your vocation has evolved. Because people, I guess, can go into law enforcement for different reasons, including however their life went, they didn't feel like they had another option. I mean, I've met people like that, but so they kind of fell into law enforcement backwards. But a lot of people going to law enforcement felt a sense of commitment to their community, to their neighbor, their fellow man. There's something there that's more like what we would call a calling, like for a preacher too. You know what I mean? What led you into that previously? Was it more, this is kind of how my life turned out, or was it more a sense of a calling, or some combination of the two? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Best way I can say it, and I would say you're right. I've had two careers, one very business development, small business, almost sales, and then what law enforcement was. Before I was a police officer in Memphis, I got connected with a father and son-in-law who owned and operated their own small business, which was an automotive parts distribution, which sounds like a front, but it's not. They're both strong.
Sounds like a chop shop, right? Yeah.
Exactly. They are both, men of strong faith as well, and they were family friends of my fiance at the time, my now wife, and I went and worked for him. And as you know, there were times where I had this route that I had worked where I was in inner city area in Memphis, in gated, tire shop, small business, automotive mechanics.
Yeah.
And then there were other times, the very next day, I'm out in Brownsville, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, Whiteville. Yeah. And every time I get around Jack, my Memphis comes back out. And I remembered when people that I knew spoke of Memphis, there was always this really negative connotation, right? There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of inherent racism. And I would hear it from both ends. Here I was, this skinny little white guy selling automotive parts,
right?
Going in heavy because of where I was in Frazier and everywhere else in North Memphis.
Yeah.
And then, you're hearing how they're talking about people that live 15 miles down the road.
To put a plug in for Frazier, for people who don't know, that was a neighborhood that transitioned from like the 70s to today in terms of its ethnic makeup. And but even the white folks who used to live in Frazier were pretty wild already.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
And so I knew some people who had grown up in Frazier, and they were a lot of fun to go to a party with.
Oh yeah.
Because they were nuts.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were wild, but Frazier today is not only wild in a good sense; it's wild in a Wild West kind of sense too. It's
absolutely.
pretty violent and
absolutely. Yeah. And so much of that is built around social economic borders and statuses. It's not the demographic.
It's your incentive structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I going to work real hard and get it taken away from me, or am I going to join in with the thieves and I'll take it away from somebody else?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I would be exposed to one end of it, talking about the affluent, folks, and then I would be, 30 miles down the road in rural parts where they had completely polar opposite opinions of what these people had.
Sure.
But they spoke with the same, I don't necessarily want to say derogatory terminology, but they had a similar sense of distance between the two of them.
Good fried chicken out there in the country parts, though.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's where Gus's Fried is originally from.
Gus's Fried Chicken.
Yeah.
Shameless plug for Gus's Fried Chicken, friend of the program.
Yeah.
I just had them last week in Kansas City, Missouri, too. It's one of the reasons we want to go there. No, but I remember I was doing that job for about 4 years, and I approached my wife, and her brother was actually considering the same kind of career move. Certainly won't say he was a fallback into police type of mentality either. I have a brother who's in the armed forces, and as a type 1 diabetic, I'm exempt from the draft if they ever have one, which is nice. But I can't join an armed forces, and I did have a sense of community. I had a sense of service, and explicitly, I remember one of the motivators to getting into the police department was feeling kind of a part of both of those communities by proximity.
Right.
I wasn't living in Frazier. I was living in Cordova, which is a suburb near Bartlett, where you were.
Yep.
And So I didn't worry about my zip code, but I would be around people all day, every day who were. And I remember, talking to Chelsea about it, was like, I feel like if I don't do something with my life, I run a danger of joining into one side of this polar feeling or the other. And I want to dive in. I don't want to believe that Memphis is all bad or the outskirts of it's all bad. I want to see where this is drawing me. I wouldn't say this was I grew up playing cops and robbers, but I don't feel like there was ever like this over long periods of time, like I want to be a cop when I grow up.
No, you weren't like Batman, like I am vengeance or anything.
Exactly,
you know what I mean? You
I am the shadow.
Yeah, I don't. You didn't want to go make sure you beat the bad guys to a pulp. But there was some sense of this is a divided community. I wonder if somebody like me kind of got after it in a different way. Is there a hope here that as community there are bright spots where we can come together?
Absolutely. And
yeah. So instead of complaining, I'm gonna put my money on the table and I'm gonna give it a shot.
Exactly. And for me, it's to go through the police academy. That's 23 weeks, and there are evidences. I think you hit the nail on the head of people who fell back into it and people who proactively went into it. People who were either, retired military or people who were in National Guard or
sure.
There were the Batmen in the world,
Sure,
that were
yeah.
in the academy and this and that. And,
Yeah.
and I remember going through that process and then getting assigned to a precinct and then joining in as a rookie and going through everything that meant, and, to not be politically correct, being a white guy in a very, very non-diverse policing part of Memphis.
So for people who don't know, Caucasians are the minority ethnicity in Memphis.
By about 60%. Yeah.
And we mean that in the metro area as well. So
Yeah.
it's about 60-40. It's 60% African American and it's
At least.
40% Caucasian ethnicity. So that is a different, and especially I think, people in the Midwest, that's a dynamic that they can't even imagine because they're used to everybody they meet's a white guy, and when everybody you meet's a black guy, and then you run into another white guy at the grocery store and you give it the head nod, you know what I mean? Like, because you recognize each other,
I got you if you got me, right?
Yeah, right, yeah. So it's a different kind of dynamic, and that's where and the police force reflects that as well,
They do.
so.
Exactly right. The makeup is commensurate of the police department as it would be with, the demographic of people. And
Sure.
I feel like there was a spiritual, compelling to join as well. Like in the as you go sense, it wasn't like I was going to go be a preacher cop, which would be a really cool comic book. But Pastor Patrolman or something. I don't know.
Pastor Patrolman.
Come up with a better one later. But what I got exposed to is what I would say was as a police officer in Memphis, in East Memphis and West Memphis and South Memphis, and then working details on Beale. And got to remember, if you go back to the time frame where we just talked about when I joined, I was on the department for about a year and a half when the George Floyd riots began happening in Minnesota, and then
they
spider webbed out, right?
Yeah, to the rest of the country.
So it was not in the golden age of I would say racial harmony or even in police friendliness. I don't know the better way of saying it.
Sure.
So there was kind of and then COVID hit and everything else all within that time frame, and it was like, listen, I'm done with this Jumanji-esque style way of living.
Whoever's playing Jumanji, please stop. Yeah.
Put the idol back.
Yeah, that's it.
You don't know what it represents.
Yeah. So, but back to that question of vocation. So that's kind of what led you into it. How do you think, looking back, because hindsight's a different thing. So looking back, and then looking at where you're at today, maybe if we could do it like, what's the same and what's not the same in terms of your sense of vocation between being a cop, working a beat in Memphis, Tennessee, one of, and depending on the year, the most violent city in America, or if it's down that year, it's still one of the most violent cities in America. So working that beat and your sense of vocation to Because I mean, you were a believer in Christ. You know, it's
Yeah.
not like you came to faith later. You were already a believer in Christ.
Right.
To working now in project development and your sense of vocation there, you said as you go in both contexts. You said as you go in the police force, and you said as you go in project development. What's the same and what's different in terms of your sense of vocation?
The funny answer, but there's a lot of truth in it too, is you have to be really comfortable with people always lying to you. and you have to have a pretty good.
No one lies to the preacher, by the way.
Oh, I know.
They come in, sit in my office, and they just tell me everything up front.
Exactly. Or they tell you once the lie's been caught up with them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of truth in that, and being able to. And I think one of the things that made me really good at what I did in both careers was having a strong BS meter.
Okay.
You know, of understanding what's really at play here. If you think about in the competitive industry that we're in, you know, you have to be really curious. You have to have good relationship with people. Your people skills and how you come off are really important in both industries. Mm-hmm. One saves your life sometimes, and one saves profitability in the other. You know, developing relationships. So I can think of, you know, and we could do a separate podcast of just horror stories if you want, but I can think of multiple occasions where when I had my own beat, myself and my partner, who's now deceased, there were multiple times where we had interacted with people, and how you interact with them in that time frame, that they saw that you were being just, that they saw you being honest and fair with them, and you weren't, you know, just lipping off for the sense of lipping off because I'm the guy with the, you know, bullet resistant vest and a gun. You know, I'm a polyester tough guy.
Yeah.
But actually speaking very honestly and trying to bring light into what they're doing. I'm not necessarily saying every time was like a walking gospel testimony, but there is a sense of how you treat people will reflect the Christ-likeness in you, or whether or not you're going to assimilate to the world. And I'm not saying I was perfect in both examples, but I can think of times where out of frustration or whatever that I did lip off, and then feeling convicted. And I remember one particular event where, you know, when the call was getting ready to be done, we turned our body cameras off to leave. I walked up to the guy and apologized. I said, "Man, I got to apologize for what I spoke to you. That was not right." And I shook his, and I put my hand out to shake, and thankfully he did the same thing. He's like, "You know what? Okay, I appreciate that." And that was a good moment between him and I as people. I'm not saying like I was bridging some huge gap like when the Crips and the Bloods tied bandanas together after, you know, Rodney King, but it was a moment that
it's not like the movies where like the teacher goes into the inner city and suddenly like saves the world or something, right?
Right, but for me, it's a moment in my life where I feel a spiritual bookmark of being transparent with another human being who, and being convicted and to be humble to do the right thing. Which was hard to do because here you are in a position of authority, and now I'm going to tell this. I'm going to speak to somebody. And say,
which, by the way, is God ordained.
Yeah,
that position of authority is God ordained. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what Pastor Paul taught us in the Bible, right? He said that you know, the king doesn't bear the sword for nothing. Mm-hmm. You know, it's so that position of authority is God ordained. Mm-hmm. The question is, how do you execute it? And that's what I hear you talking about in terms of vocation.
Right, and there are a couple other times where this is actually kind of scary if you think about it, where we'd be at a corner store and we'd be talking to somebody, and somebody come up to us and be like, "Officer Fry, y'all don't want to be here tomorrow." You know, and I mean, just being straight up, you know, and there were times we were like,
the neighborhood had your back because they knew that you were being just and fair with them.
There were multiple occasions, and I'm not the only one that can say this, so this isn't some Adam only thing, but there were people who would tell stories about, you know, people that they took to jail and would go do a long time in prison. And there's one story that one of the instructors that taught us at the academy, whether this is true or not, I don't know. But anyways, he was at a soup kitchen. He was doing dishes or something. And a guy that he had taken to jail on a violent crime charge, I'll protect some innocence here, he had turned around in the kitchen. He was had his back turned with one of those huge industrial, you know, sinks. Yeah. And turned around and saw this guy, you know, kind of duck coming in through the door.
Yeah.
And so this guy looked at him and he's going, "Man, I know this guy, but I don't know where it is." And the guy looked at him and he's like, "Officer Gonzalez, you remember me?" And he was like, I have no way to protect myself other than this industrial super soaker. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to do. And the guy shook his hand and was like, I want you to know that I got clean after I was my time in jail. You treated me fair. You treated me nice. This and that and the other. And if you think about if Gonzo is what we used to call him, if Gonzo would have behaved in a way that was not just
Right.
with this guy, here he is in a back room, kitchen basement where nobody knows where he's at.
Yeah.
He could have been in the fight of his life.
Right.
But how he treated this guy left a mark. So you take the relationship aspect, how you treat people, being able to use discernment, and how people speak to you and how you present yourself as a police officer, and then you take those same principles into business and you say, I'm really going to pay attention to how people speak to me. I'm going to kind of read you.
Yeah.
And one of ProLift's philosophies about our sales process. There's a sales process course that we all go through. I'll give him a plug, and it's called buyer facilitation. And it's the idea of we just want the truth. I'm going to come to you, and we're going to set ground rules together. If we feel like this is going to be a good conversation to have, great. If at any point in time you don't want to talk to me anymore, just tell me and I'll leave. Like putting all the cards on the table early, and not doing the. I hate to give car salesman a bad name, but everybody does. I'm not trying to think of let me go back and talk to my manager and I'll see what I can work out for you, kind of thing. So the integrity behind how we handle ourselves was what was attractive about ProLift, not just its mission and purpose. I was able to use skills maybe not directly related to sales, like it doesn't help you run an Excel sheet or use Word better, right, and how to type a proposal, but the relationship building of what you do. You speak to people honestly and with integrity. You build relationships, and people trust you. And there have been multiple times where, could have been life or bodily injury. We're saved on the street in Memphis, at 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning. And then there's times where somebody will tell me in my professional life now, like, I just want to be honest with you about what we're doing, and that'll benefit me, you know. And as long as we both operate there, I would say the similarities in vocation go back to those foundational principles of how do you treat people in whatever you're doing.
Well, I mean, what kind of strikes me as I'm listening to you talk is like, okay, so law enforcement, sales, they're not the same. But you talked about where somebody's life could be on the line, whether it's somebody that you're talking to or you may have to place them under arrest or in some way otherwise detain them. And you're working with this person. Their life can be on the line. Your life can be on the line. When people sometimes approach business, there can be a self-centeredness to it because we're talking about money. And people often don't trust God for their provision, even if they go to church and they know how to say churchy sounding words like, everything comes from God or something like that.
Yeah.
They may not actually be trusting in God for their daily provision. They are trusting in the money. And so their performance today, and it is a performance. You talk about telling the truth versus not telling the truth. It's a performance. It's a curated something that they're putting out there, either as an individual or the product they're trying to push or whatever. And there can be a dishonesty there that's driven by a place of fear and by a need to survive. And when you approach that conversation on a more human level, hey, let's just be straight up with each other, and maybe as neighbors we can help each other out here.
Right.
I think of, so my old man started out as a teacher, and then he went into business at one point. He made a career change. And he did very well for himself in business. And I asked him one time how he was doing so well in sales, because now even in retirement, they get these young guys coming out of college and they have to go through another graduate level course with my father on how to actually sell. And I asked him, well, like, how is it that everybody looks at you this way, and how is it that you found success in what you're doing? And he said, I never went into a conversation where I was worried about myself or my own numbers first. I always made sure that I went into the conversation and tried to understand what the other guy needs. Not what he wants, what he needs. And then I tried to make sure that he understood that I'm here to help him to reach what he needs too, not just for my own sake, but for his sake. And when you're honest with people like that, you can have a back and forth conversation that can be beneficial.
I agree. And relationships that you develop with people, you're going to have the relationship with somebody that you invest in, be
Right.
that positive or negative.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to, and Bible tells us
Every divorced couple will tell you that. Positive or negative. You're still invested.
Yeah.
You're not really free,
The cool thing about being made in God's image is the realization that we're reproducers. And that's not just in the biological sense.
Sure.
You reproduce what you are.
Right.
And I think
so disciples make disciples. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have never been more convicted of that than October 26th of 2020 when I held my son for the first time.
Okay.
And I looked at him, and I'll keep it as PG as possible for this podcast, but I remember thinking to myself, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
There are things about me that if I hide from him,
Yeah.
he's going to be a hider. I'm going to reproduce what I am. And I'm not saying that I've been in the straight and narrow since October 26th of 2020, but I would say that the prayer of my daily life comes to, and if you don't do this, I highly encourage you to do it. It is a scary prayer, is to say, Holy Spirit, be heavy on me today.
Okay.
I love that prayer because there's been so many times where trials, tribulations, temptations are navigated so much differently than before I prayed that prayer.
Yeah.
Where I'm going, Holy Spirit, be heavy on me today.
Yeah.
Just be heavy. Be present and be heavy.
Yeah.
Let me feel your resistance at times when I need to be resistance. Let me feel your motivation when you need me motivation. But be present and be heavy on me.
Yeah.
And since that time, since that daily prayers come in, the invitation's there and the presence is real. And as a reproducer, you reproduce what you are. I think the story you just told about with your dad, and I think about people that I've mentored in sales since then. And anytime I hear a critique about, one of my sales guys or people who I've helped mentor as they've come on to ProLift, and I see them be successful, I'm encouraged. When I see them challenged, I don't think, wow, if they would just get their stuff together, they could do really well. I think, is there something I missed? Is there something I can do? Can I be a help?
That's interesting that you put it that way, because when you talk about your impact on people that you're in some way responsible for, I'm going to go back to my old man a minute. I remember one summer I was working for him because I didn't think I wanted to go to college. And he owned a pallet company, and part of that was a sawmill in Kentucky in the summer.
Oof.
Yeah, oof is the correct term for that. And he put me in that sawmill that summer, and then at the end of the summer he asked me, so how do you feel about college? And I said, I'm thinking I might look into it,
My bag's actually packed.
Yeah, right. So, but during that summer that I was working for him in the sawmill, he had to let somebody go. And it's a small company. Everybody knew after it happened. And so I asked him about it on the ride home. I said, well, what about so-and-so? Did you really let him go today? And he said, yeah, I had to fire him. And I said, oh, well, what'd he do wrong? And I'll never forget this response until the day I die. He said, no, he didn't do anything wrong. I did. I put him in a position to fail, and I shouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. It's my fault. That blew my mind that this guy's the boss,
yeah.
and he took personal responsibility for the fact that he had to let this guy go. He said, no, that's not his fault. He was the employee. I'm the boss. I should have set him up differently. It's my fault.
Yeah.
And just that sense. So you want to talk about vocation. So vocation is about how we see ourselves. It's also how we see other people around us, how we show up for other people, mm-hmm. right? And that can be positive or negative, right?
Sure.
What I think's funny, though, is that you brought up your son and you said, I got to be careful what I reproduce here. What's interesting about that vocation of father, that calling of being a father, that seems kind of, in some ways, independent of what you did for a living.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with whether or not you remain a police officer, whether or not you go into the business world, what you end up doing. that vocation seems in some ways weirdly independent of what you did for a living.
And I'm reminded of a story that's been told in my family. My grandmother lost a child when he was an adult. He was 37. It was my mom's younger brother, and he died very young, and as a young adult. And he had 3 kids at the time. And my mom tells the story that my grandma was doing the dishes shortly after he had passed away, and in her grief, she said, I'll never understand God. And Mom, as anybody would think, the knee-jerk reaction is she's dealing with an immense amount of grief and saying, I'm either mad at God or I don't understand. I love God, but I don't understand His plan. But what was interesting is she goes, Mom, how can you say that? I understand you're so sad, this and that and the other. She goes, no. I'm not saying that because I'm mad at Him. But He gave Jesus up willingly. I would never have done that. That's why she would never understand God. She goes, yeah. I loved Kenny so much. I couldn't do that. And for me, being a parent, it was so much of my relationship with God changed after the birth of my first and then my second son. It was I guess God knocking on my head said, have you got it yet? Is interacting with them, and I never understood the Bible verse where it said that He's a jealous God. It says, I'm a jealous God. And I'm like, I thought the Bible was, you don't want me to be jealous. I thought jealousy was a bad thing. And then I think about when I come home from work and my boys run to me and it's, Dad's home, and they grab me, they hug me and kiss on me or whatever, and we want to play.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that so much, but I understand what a jealous God is more now, that statement, when I see my boys receive joy from things that aren't me. Selfishly.
Yeah. Okay.
Where I'm like, I want to be down there playing Paw Patrol action figures with you. Can I play cards with you? No, Dad, I'm busy. I'm fine. And you're just like, I want that joy. And for me it was.
I gotta say too, by the way, because I've met your sons and mm-hmm. I'm a girl dad, so I don't have the same experience and the same memories that you have. But your boys are all boy. They're like 110% boy. So when you're not playing with them, you really are missing out because they are all boy, and it is fun. It
is. It's so much fun, and it's really cool that they've taken an interest in the things that Chelsea and I like. Like they love watching college football. My youngest son, he's 2.
Yeah. And
when he wakes up, he's so smart. In the morning, and we're both home.
Yeah.
He knows it's got to be a weekend because Dad's still here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how he tells time.
Yeah, that's how he tells time. His dad's home, so it must be the day that football's on.
Yeah.
And there's that few weeks of the year where there's like a football game on 6 nights a week or something.
Yeah.
And so now my youngest, who's 2, will in the morning time look at me and go, "You want to go watch football? We watch football?" Or at night, because he knows Monday Night Football's on.
Yeah.
Watch football? You want to watch football, Dad? And it's really cool. And they go down the stairs and they have a football. They play tackle and play fumble drills. And you're right, they're all boy. And it's those are the type of things that I get a different understanding of God of saying, you're my child and I love you so much and I want to be with you at all times. I want you to be with me at all times. Like nothing would thrill me more great. I mean, there's days, don't get me wrong, I'm not a perfect parent, where I'm like, get away from me. Like,
right, sure.
Get off my lap, leave me alone. You know? But I travel quite a bit for work, and it's so crazy, and I know you have as well in your life, when you're absent from your kids. Like this last week, I was in Kansas City for a few nights, and I, got ready to go to bed, and I was like, man, I really miss the boys.
Yeah. And
probably 10 hours within that time frame of being home, it was like, all right, boys, I need some space. But
how can I miss you if you won't go away? That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I would say, how my vocation has changed in my perspective. I think there's something heavy, as we talked about, a parent losing a child, and you think about what your vocation is to that child and to your family, and and everything else, like, I don't. There's a powerful part of how God has allowed us to experience who He is through relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when God made Adam by himself, made him, He said it's not good that he be alone,
Mm-hmm.
because being made in God's image was being made in community with Himself, with
Right.
Jesus, Holy Spirit, right? And that's why He gave that helpmate, and that's why it's like I'm gonna give you guys markers of what relationship feels like,
Mm-hmm.
and has done the same thing in a very powerful way by allowing Chelsea and I to have our own kids and to experience that new vocation. And God hasn't, and I'm not making an equal correlation, but the things that I do that cause me stress or anger or anxiety, fear, I navigate through with the support of the Holy Spirit and through my faith for the benefit of my relationship with God and how it helps my family. I would not probably want things to be easy based on the benefit of what I get with my kids and my wife. And in the same way, Jesus dying on the cross was not plan B.
Right.
There's a lot of people who think, man, if Adam and Eve just wouldn't have sinned, that was never plan B was never. We can get into a deeper conversation there.
Well, but I've got some students at Concordia who have asked that question. Like, why allow the devil? Why allow evil? Why allow them to fall? Why? And I looked at him and said, I think he looked at you and felt like you were worth it.
Yeah.
And it stops them cold. You know, like they don't, and but you're right. It was never plan B.
Yeah.
It was always plan A.
And God hasn't removed Himself of the pain of experiencing what a sinful world looks like so that He can also experience the benefit of relationship.
Well, we're talking about relationship as part of vocation, right? Because we said how we show up for other people, etc. And you're relating this to, first of all, the Godhead, and then what Jesus has done for His church, and really for all mankind, if they'll just say thank you and believe, right?
Yeah.
But for those of us who are part of His church, I mean, that feels different. We experience that differently now, and but your point, really, I'm hearing you say, and you tell me if I'm getting you right or getting you wrong, but it seems like you're saying that when we talk about relationship as Christian men, we're not talking about relationship in any kind of ideal setting or context. We're talking about relationship even in its messiness, even when and where there is sin, and continuing intentionally leaning into that relationship regardless of the challenges that relationship presents to us.
Couldn't agree more. And you think about, or even if I think about the correlation in my life, I get home and I want to turn my phone off and enjoy presence with my wife, with my kids, or in my private time or whatever, right? And if God Himself did not, which we're not saying He couldn't have done, as we talk about plan A, plan B, facetiously, if He did not remove Himself, if He did not remove the presence of pain, suffering, if He had the power to do that,
right,
He's still saying it, like you said, it's worth it. And for me, it's like, as you go through stresses at work, back when I was, the mental, physical, emotional strain of policing, and some small, deviations of the same platform, the same things that happen in project development, higher risk proposals, and markers that you need to hit and things like that, and the stress that's involved. God's saying to you in a way like, I didn't give myself an easy way to this.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm not treating you differently. I'm not, when people, you said it earlier, and it was a really cool statement, like, God makes all, how'd you say it earlier? God makes all things happen, or everything comes from God, right?
Yeah.
except for trials and temptations, right? No.
Those only come from the devil,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
exactly. So
Or when there's sin and brokenness in a relationship, that's where I'm supposed to quit, right?
yeah,
Because that's not what God made me for. He only made me for relationships that are filled with rainbows and sunshine, and right. And so what I'm hearing from you, I think, is when we think about our vocation, if God looked at us and said, it's worth it, maybe when we think about our vocations, whether that's as husband, father, police officer, project developer, pastor, professor, whatever it is that we're doing, we have to take into account that there's going to be suffering as part of this road that we're traveling with Jesus.
mm-hmm.
And I think we need to ask the question, is it worth it? So maybe this is a good place to kind of tie a bow on this particular conversation for today's podcast. Let me ask you, being husband to Chelsea, and I know I've got you on recording here, so there's a little bit of pressure. If we talk about
This is close to Valentine's Day too.
Yeah, if we talk about the curated self, is it worth it?
Yes.
Dad,
Yes.
it's worth it. Okay. Being a Memphis cop, was it worth it?
Ooh. See, so much of that is still tied to
Your partner.
my partner, emotional pain and grief. I'll have a closer as well in this conversation, but I would look at it and say yes because of the relationships that I've been able to develop and strengthen, yourself included, by being able to share that story
Right.
that I would not have had, and to me that becomes his memory.
Okay.
Is how I get to love people differently now with his absence
Right.
that I may not have ever had.
Okay. So that's a different way of counting whether or not it's worth it, but you're even counting the pain there.
Yeah, worth it.
Project management for a company that operates by explicitly Christian principles. Because I know not every day at the office is easy.
Right.
Worth it?
Yeah.
Worth it.
Worth
Okay. Well, look at that.
And kind of my closing piece to it all is, what Jesus said, in the world you will have trouble, but I give you my peace. And I think the thing that we as believers who either grown up in the Bible Belt or have been exposed to so much Christianity so soon in life that you get kind of tempered to it.
Sure.
The word peace does not mean
Absence
comfort.
of struggle or pain.
Doesn't mean comfort.
Yeah, it doesn't mean comfort.
Peace doesn't mean comfort.
No.
Peace, because those are mutually exclusive words. Peace, comfort sometimes comes after peace in the Bible, but not the same context. Right?
The disciples were dang near drowning in the boat, and Jesus was fast asleep.
Peace and comfort are different things.
Peace and comfort are different things.
That's the title of the podcast.
He was sleeping pretty peacefully.
Right.
Peace and comfort are different things. That's the title. We got to it.
And I would say that is when you think about things that are worth it, and I would say, have I found peace in the things where I have no comfort?
Okay.
And I would look at that and say, have I found peace in the worst times of my marriage? Yes. Have I found peace in the best times? Same thing with police officer, same thing with project developer, parent, friend.
Mm-hmm.
Have I found peace where comfort wasn't present? Yes. And that's how I would say worth it or not. Did you experience peace when there was no comfort?
Awesome. And only Christ can give that.
Oh, yeah.
Period.
Or a dog. No.
Or a dog.
I remember in the worst part of my marriage, I remember I came home and I told Matt Brennan this as we were going through. As we were going through counseling together,
Yeah.
I said, in tears, he goes, what are you thankful for today? I said, and I started crying. I said, my dog. And he's like, why is that? I said, she's the only thing happy to see me when I come home.
She's the only thing happy to see me.
When I
All
come
right.
home.
Well, kids, the moral of today's lesson is get you a Bible and get you a dog. And you're going to be...
You're not going to have comfort, but
Yeah.
you'll have peace.
Adam, thanks for sitting down with me, man. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate you being willing to share what Christ is doing in your life, what that walk looks like, and so thanks again for being part of things for my tiny little podcast here. I appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you. I love you like a brother. I'm so grateful that I can sit down and talk to you about these kind of things as we have in the past. And again, as we talked about things that as we go, that God didn't have us meet in Memphis, He had us meet here. I'm very thankful.
Yeah.
That He had us meet us at this point in life rather than another one. So
Me too.
that's really cool.
All right, man.